What's up, guys? Welcome to the Reading Out Loud Book Club community. I'm Keionna and I'm so glad you guys found your way here. And now that you guys are here, let's make sure that you guys are subscribed to my YouTube channel and click that notification bell so you guys get notifications when I upload new videos on YouTube. This is the moment you all have been waiting for. I have finally finished reading all of the books that comprise the FaerieAthon. So today I present you all my FaerieAthon wrap up. FaerieAthon began in June and ended last month. So since I am currently on winter break, I decided to take advantage of all this free time I have to film these reviews. Some of the books that we read for FaerieAthon and the books that I'm going to be talking about today are Fantasy Standalone, The Darkest Part of the Forest, and the Modern Fairy Tales Trilogy by Holly Black. I didn't get the new bind-up edition to the Modern Fairy Tales Trilogy that compiles all 3 books in the series, although I wish I had because it is way more aesthetically pleasing than the individual books that I got. But I still really appreciate them because they give me that early 2000s vibe that I really enjoy. I have a myriad of thoughts on all of these books, so I kind of want to make this like a review and discussion piece, and I feel like calling it that would definitely suffice. Also, I would like to mention as a disclaimer that I'm really happy to be revisiting my thoughts on these books because they're such a throwback vibe, and I generally don't prefer to read books like these in the summertime. I like to read books like these in the fall or winter because they're normally like really chilling and cold and dark, if that makes any sense. What initially attracted me to the FaerieAthon is the theme, which is fairies. I didn't know that I would like fairy tales until I read the Folk of the Air, and ever since I've just been hooked on fairy themed books. And FaerieAthon kicked off with, oh, it's backwards, Tithe. This is the first book in the Modern Fairy Tales trilogy, and my first thoughts on this book is that it gave me very dark and grungy teenage angsty vibes. It's about a changeling named Kei who believes that she's human but is really a fairy pixie and was switched at birth and therefore is able to make contact with other fairies, and one fairy in particular is Roybin, who is the knight of the Unseelie court. The way that Kei finds out that she's really a fairy is through her imaginary friends Ludi Lou and Spike, who are really just fairy pixies themselves, but she believes that they are her imaginary friends because she thought she was human for so long. They reappear in her life as a teenager when her and her mother Ellen move back to Jersey with her grandmother. Naturally, there is a hint of magical realism within this series because of the fairy theme, and there is a lot of tension going on between the Seelie and Unseelie courts, and this series really emphasizes the power struggle between these two courts, which is something that wasn't as prevalent in the Folk of the Air. I feel like there is a lot of political intrigue within the Folk of the Air series, just not as clearly defined between the Seelie and Unseelie courts as it is in this series. And I'm actually really glad that I read the Folk of the Air series prior to reading this series. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to understand what was going on in this series politically wise. Honestly, before picking up the Folk of the Air, I probably wouldn't have picked up this series at all, but here we are. What happens in Tithe is Kei gets caught between the war when she finds Roybin wounded and she saves his life, and so therefore he feels like he is indebted to her, because the thing with fairies is that they are really big on repaying any debt that they owe. So he gives her the one thing that is like the most important thing to him, which could potentially mean life or death to him, which is his name. Now Kei is looking like, your name? What am I gonna do with your name? Like, seriously, what is this? But little does she know that apparently knowing what a fairy's name is could mean life or death for them, because you can use their name to control them. So essentially he is giving her something that is really valuable to him. This book sort of references a riddle, which the fairies are also really big on, and which is another reason why I feel like the plot was really funny. Kei quickly learns that not only is she a fairy, but that also she is the tithe offering that will settle the war and bring peace amongst the courts for at least 7 years, which is actually scary as when you think about it, because who wants to be a freaking tithe offering? Then Roybin is like low-key trying to protect her, and then they develop feelings for each other, which I wasn't expecting because these two characters seem like two unlikely characters to fall in love with each other. But I liked that unpredictability and that we got a little bit of romance in this series. Side note, I'm really glad that Holly Black didn't make Kay like one of those girls that's like, I'm not like other girls type of human girl, even though she's really not like other girls because she's actually a fairy pixie. But I find that really refreshing, and I also find that Kay's character is very likable. The character development in this story is alright. I feel like the two main characters and their romance, what they have going on, is really what carries this story, and that alone doesn't leave much commentary for the secondary characters, for me at least. This book does have the enemies to lovers trope, so that really consumes the entire story, although there are many different subplots to uncover that really make the book more interesting. The world building between the mortal world and the fairy world is good. I'm not sure if this is a trigger warning, but there are graveyard scenes throughout the book and the death of a sibling. Just thought I'd throw that out there. I had virtually no issue with the writing style because Holly Black typically has really great writing, and it was kind of fast-paced. The main plot kind of had a slow start to it, but after about 100 pages in, I was like really engaged. I'm gonna be honest, my expectations for this book was significantly low, and throughout reading the book, I periodically went back and forth between rating it a 3 out of 5 stars and a 4 out of 5 stars. But as the story progressed and I fully understood all of the plots and the subplots, I wound up rating it a 4 out of 5 stars, especially because I really liked the ending. I feel like the ending to a book is super important because it's very telling, and I just think that this book is so freaking cute and so freaking cool, and I was instantly excited to read the next book in this series, which is Valiant. This series represents diverse characters and LGBTQ voices, and I just feel like this book and this series really have all the right elements that make a really good story. And despite how old this book is, because it was published back in 2002, it really brings it to life. I would recommend this book for you, especially if you're into fairy books and if you're looking for a suspenseful and intense YA fantasy read. 10 out of 10 would recommend this book for you. Following Tithe in the Modern Fairy Tales trilogy is Valiant, which was published in 2005, only a few years after Tithe. Now, this book follows what is seemingly a completely different narrative, but still has all the same grungy and teenage angsty vibes as Tithe. And these two books correlate only minutely because this story takes place predominantly in the mortal world, specifically Jersey to New York, which is totally different from all of the other fairy books that I've read because most of them either take place partially in the fairy world and in the mortal world. This book catches up with Val, who also lives in New Jersey with her mom. She and her mom both have two distinct character differences, as Val is more into sports and her mom was a pageant queen. And after witnessing an earth-shattering sight between her mom and her boyfriend, Val faces the ultimate betrayal and decides to go to a hockey game in New York. There, she meets a couple of squatters and decides to live there with them in hopes to never return home. This book is hella problematic, or what I perceive to be problematic, and I guess it all depends on what your connotation of problematic is. It could all very well just be situational, and I've learned that although a book may be problematic, it doesn't necessarily make the book bad, even if it's triggering to some people. I totally respect everyone's opinion though, and feel like there is just some things that the majority of us can agree on that are problematic. That's why I feel like the term is very fitting here. So the basis by which Val ran away were for a really good reason, and honestly, I don't blame her. All of the beginning characters absolutely sucked in the sense that they all betrayed this girl, and the opening subplot just made me straight up angry for her, and honestly, she deserved so much better. After she runs away, she decides to shave all her hair off, and I just feel like that was low-key cliche because it seems like most girls always decide to like chop their hair off like after they experience something devastating, and I just feel like there's better ways to channel your frustration. Although I get it, it was really messed up what happened to her, like how like her friends and her family like played with her and I just got secondhand embarrassment from reading this book. Val starts a whole new life in New York, and I really had to finish reading this book mostly because I wanted to know if she was ever going to return home or what she was going to do, because they were practically living on the streets. Then she gets hooked on some drug called Nevermore, and so then it like adventures through their imaginations, and Val and one of her friends get into a lot of trouble because they're caught stealing by this fairy. And so Val makes a deal with Ravis, who is the fairy, to save her friend's life, and therefore is indebted to him and really can't go home until she fulfills her promise to him, which is essentially making deliveries of this drug Nevermore to the exiled fae. This story is the epitome of every parent's worst nightmare, okay? It includes running away, taking drugs, selling drugs, and having sex with strangers in a train tunnel. But then it is also really like every girl's worst nightmare. But this was also a really cool story about friendship, and this novel includes the enemies to friends trope, which was also really nice. This book was actually a lot easier for me to get into than Tithe, although I still really like Tithe. The writing in this book was also really great, which is something that you can always expect from picking up a Holly Black book. The character development was alright, although there was some irrelevant characters, which is characters that just didn't really make sense in regards to the plot. The world building was alright, and there were some parts in this book that were incongruent. This is definitely a book that left me asking a lot of questions. It's interesting because I always thought that fairies were supposed to be good, but they're actually really horrible little creatures, and what's even more sad is that the humans portrayed in this book are way worse than the fairies, and that's saying a lot. I feel like fairies are like an allegory for human immorality, and I think that's really cool to have in YA books. But I also feel like the fairies' inability to lie, it makes up for all of their evilness. Overall, Valiant was really good. Some of the trigger warnings include drug usage, running away from home, cheating on a partner, death of an animal, and scalping. I believe those are all of the trigger warnings. Ironside is the third and last book in the Modern Fairy Tales trilogy, and this book picks right back up where we left off in Tithe, and so we see a lot of growth and character development from all of the characters in Tithe, and Kay is still adapting to her new pixie form and her magic. I think that this book was really good because a lot of the secondary characters had a lot of character development and progressed very well throughout the book. At this point in the series, the war between the Unseelie Court and the Seelie Court have began, and Kay is now ready to proclaim herself to Reuben, who is now the king of the Unseelie Court, and she embarrasses herself by getting drunk, and the catch is that he sends her on this impossible quest to find a fairy who can tell a lie. Now, anybody who knows fairies knows that fairies cannot tell a lie. It's one of their most absolute laws ever. So Kay is definitely feeling resentment towards Reuben and regret for her own actions. The subplot was definitely interesting to me because one of my favorite aspects about fairies is their inability to tell a lie, and so the fact that there is an entire book that plays off of that was absolutely priceless to me. Throughout this book there are also a lot of different subplots that also make it all the more interesting. I feel like the main thing that was carrying the story for me was Kay and Corny's newfound friendship, as well as Kay and Reuben's romance. And then the ending was pretty good too. It was really good enough to keep my focus. It did get a little slow at one point, and there are some parts towards the end that just didn't feel very well for me. I did really like these books. They're not my favorite series ever, and I gave them a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, The Darkest Part of the Force, on the other hand, I gave this book a 1 out of 5 stars. I know, shocking, right? I actually DNF'd this book. This was the first book I DNF'd of this year. Nothing about this book was holding up for me. The plot, the characters, everything just felt so flat, and the storyline in general just didn't pique my interest at all. Although I will give it that it is unpredictable, and I really enjoy unpredictability in my novels. Certain parts really confused me, and it just wasn't flowing for me well enough as I would have liked for it to, and honestly that just took away so much of the thrill from reading it, so I really had to DNF it. I'm really glad that I decided to join FaerieAthon. Despite how old some of these books are, they really did make a difference in my life, and I really appreciate hidden gems. I just knew that this was going to be a really good readathon, and I highly encourage you guys to read some of Holly Black's work. That concludes my FaerieAthon wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and were able to receive something from it. Happy holidays to you all, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Until next time, bye.